Hunting season is over, and it's about time to go out and collect some of the data cards from the trail cameras. We haven't been out for the last couple weeks because of the snow and ice making the hills a little bit sketchy. It's time to do a little bit of scouting and seeing what trees are down on the trails, as well as collecting some of the SD cards from the cameras. We'll first be stopping at Misery Condo, which is our blind on the short bench in the Northwest Woods, which is just south of the barn and a little bit to the west. Blind is in a nice area marked by cedar trees with scattered red oaks, which drop the acorns, alias deer candy, throughout this area. The camera near the blind shows a little bit of activity from the end of December through the end of January. From the Misery Condo blind, we're going a short distance to the west to get on Misery Hill. Misery Hill was named by the previous owner. This was reminiscent of basic training, I believe, at maybe Fort Knox, where one of the long hills has quite a bit of a slope to it and is a grueling bit of training. This hill itself has a slope of between 15 and 20 degrees and can be quite slippery when it's muddy or icy. I believe that there are actually 3 hills that are difficult in training at Fort Knox, and they were named Misery, as well as Agony and Heartbreak. These cameras are looking both west and east along the creek, following the North Bank Trail, which is an old skidding trail. Considering this spot right here for a ground blind gives us access to the hill to the northwest and down to the creek bed at that crossover. Need to see what the cameras at this tree show. Also, we can see the other end of the creek bed from here also. This trail does seem to show a lot of activity. And I think we will go ahead and consider making that ground blind probably 30 yards or so up the hill from where the hill intersects the trail. In front of us is the repaired gully that was in pretty bad shape until the boys were able to reconstruct it essentially and make it a bit safer to cross about 18 months ago. They were able to build it up by placing a few tons of flat rocks in the depth of the gully and adding about 1,500 pounds of concrete to it. Although there's a lot of runoff that comes down through this gully, their patchwork seems to be holding very well. There is a significant amount of slope on this North Bank trail, and as you can see on the left side, there's eroding areas that are taking parts of the trail down towards the creek. Further on, there are areas where the trail is impassable. One of the easiest places to cross the creek is at Grants Junction, which will take you directly to a trail going to Big Rack. We're going to go past this and cross over closer to Jericho Road Trail. Crossing at this point is a little bit steeper entrance into the water than at Grants Junction, but the base of the creek is a flat rock and fairly solid when you're going to cross it. Usually when I'm going this way, I'll be turning left onto Jericho Road to take us up to the platform, which is a flat bench area on the south part of the property. Today is going to be different. We're going to see if we can cross the creek a little further west to get to the North Bank Trail. To the right, you can see where the trail collapsed into the creek. That crossing was actually fairly easy and then got us back onto the North Bank Trail, and actually the longest stretch of the trail that's still intact until it's disrupted right before the creek field. At this point, we're going to try to cross over to the south side of the creek and make our way best as well as we can through the creek bed till we can get to a trail getting to the October Trail and then over to the creek field. This does look doable, and we'll cross over to a tiny little island segment before we get over to the south side. It seems that deer use this little strip of an island quite often, since each bank to the north and to the south are pretty steep drop-offs. Now on the south side of the creek, it seems as though there's quite a bit of flat area, and we should be able to negotiate our way up further west, hopefully, unless we encounter some trees that are a bit too close or some big drop-offs. I suspect that staying closer to the creek would make it easier to make our way through. Although initially it did not seem the better way to go, veering away from the creek and going on a little bit more of the slope was easier, just going through brambles and briars and a few smaller trees without encountering any large obstacles. With the October Trail in front of us and the creek field to our right and across the creek, we were wondering if we had to clear a little bit of an area to get to the trail. Decided against it. This is a point we most often cross the creek since it is very shallow and flat as well as stable. This is the Creekfield Food Plot, which is a flat area just to the north of the creek on the west boundary of our property. This food plot is a fairly consistent grazing point for a number of deer and has shown good consistency over the years. Does it seem that they stumble when they get to the left part of the sunbeam? SD cards collected from the north side, and we're going to head back to the barn and head back later to the south side to collect the SD cards from the cameras over there. At this point, looking to the north, we could see a fairly flat segment of the North Bank Trail that appears to be intact from where we had seen it to the east and from where it was blocked further to the west. We were thinking about investigating it. The question is, how deep is the creek if we get about halfway across, and are there any holes that we may fall into before we get to the other side? It's a little bit difficult to tell the depth once you get halfway across, although the water is fairly clear. Since the water is icy cold and the wind was blowing a bit and it's still cold, we figured the water may be a little bit too deep since we have no cell phone reception down by the creek if we were to get stuck in the middle. We can wait until it warms up to investigate this small segment. We made one more stop on the north side at the junction of a logging trail and the North Bank Trail to hang a camera just before the GoPro battery died. More to come on the south side camera cards.